I was working on this set of carburetors and thought I'd try to make a short video of this. I was at Barber's Vintage Festival a couple of weeks back and picked up a 1978 Suzuki GS 550. Surprisingly, it only has 680 some odd miles on it. And I'd been watching some carburetor videos on YouTube, and there's some people that's done videos, especially on these cars, and they've been a little mistaken on some of what they've told you, what the functions are of some of the adjustments and stuff. I've already taken the float bowls off of this. The people I bought it from had done kind of a pre-clean on them. It wasn't running right when I bought it, but I wasn't worried about that. I pretty much knew what was wrong with it, or hoped I did at the time. And carbs simply need to be cleaned. Anything that old with that few miles is going to have the carbs cleaned. But getting back to kind of why I did this video, doing this video, is in one video, this one gentleman, he's calling the screws that go in these jet openings here your synchronizing screws, and these are not synchronizing screws. This is a fuel mixture screw. You'll note fuel mixture screw is always a screw if it's closest to the head, whether it be under the carburetor or on top of the body of the carburetor. If it's on the engine side of the floats, it is a fuel mixture screw. And to adjust these, you simply put them in, screw them in all the way, just get them seated to the bottom, but don't over torque them all the way down, because you run the risk of this taper meshing with the taper in there, and then when you go to back it out, it's snapping the very tip of this off. And I'll be honest, I know of no way to get it back out, and you pretty much would have to look for a new carb body. But this will be your fuel mixture screw on these carburetors. Your actual synchronizing screws are found underneath the little caps. You take 30 screws off, you'll find a nut and a little stud sticking up, which a flat blade screwdriver will set in. And by synchronizing, what they're meaning is you're setting the height of each individual carburetor, so each individual carburetor opens and pulls the same amount of vacuum at the same time. If you don't have a set of vacuum gauges, you can do it in kind of a crude way, using just about anything. But oh, thought those were gone. But if you got a set of torch cleaning tips, what you can do is back your idle off and then set one of them and measure its opening with chosen one of the tips, and then go through and make sure all four of them are set at the same height as the first one and lock them down. That will at least get you in the ballpark if you don't have a set of vacuum gauges. But talking about the fuel mixture screws, these cars also have an air mixture screw, which is a little bit longer, and it does have a flat point to it. And you'll notice it's on the airbox side of the carburetors. All screws on the airbox side are going to be air screws. Airbox, air screw. These two you'll screw all the way in to get your base settings. And if you're going to clean them, the easiest way to do it is from the get-go, screw it in to see where they were, and after you clean them, put them back where they were. Usually you're going to find it's about 1 1/4, 1 1/8, 1 1/2 out from all the way in. But there's definitely a difference between an air screw, a fuel screw, and a synchronization screw. So you really need to know the terminology, because each one of them's doing a different function for you. And if you're trying to play with these screws to get your synchronization right, well, you're kind of just barking up the wrong tree, because it's just not going to work. Also, on this early model GS 550, It's a little bit odd because they use your standard main jet. They do use a pilot jet, but they also use a mid-range jet. Mid-range jet on these carbs are not often found, but Suzuki does use one, and try to explain it to you. It's kind of like a baton race where you pass the baton from one to the other. Your bike's going to start and idle off your idle jet, and as you rev it, it passes the baton to your mid-range jet, and as the RPMs increase, it'll pass the fuel off to your main jet. And really, with 3 jets, it makes getting that mid-range flat spot out a lot easier, because you've got an independent step in between your pilot and your main, whereas in most carburetors you simply have a pilot and a main. With that being said, this is also, in these carburetors, one that would be easy to miss because it screws in right here next to the main jet, but it goes down in the body of the carburetor close to, I'm going to guess, about a ½ inch, and then your mid-range jet screws right down on top of it. Now, they don't actually touch or anything, but it goes in the same orifice. And I've seen people take this one out, clean it, clean the main jet, and just squirt some fluid down here. But the hole in one of these pilot jets is just so tiny. I'm not even sure you can see that wire, but that's about the hole diameter of this jet. And if it's got old crusty gas in there, a lot of times simply spraying some carburetor cleaner through there won't work, and you'll get them all clean. You know they're clean, you put them back on, and it will not idle unless you have the choke at least partially open. And I'll tell anybody, if you clean your carbs and it's not running unless you have that choke just cocked a little bit open, you've missed something in your idle circuit. Because what you're doing by choking it is richening it up. You're letting gas go through the choke circuit to compensate for your pilot circuit. So, hate to tell you, you got to take them back off. You got to clean it again. I don't believe in sparing the carb cleaner. Use as much as you want to. Stuff's cheap. Use it. Use it in every little orifice, everything that's got a little hair. You say, well, not everybody may have welding tip cleaners. Well, almost anybody can find a piece of electrical wire, strip the insulation back, and you just wind up with copper threads or strands. And they work ideally to clean out all these little orifices, so you get at least a hole to start blowing carburetor cleaner through, which will finish the job up for you. One thing I'd like to tell everybody is when you're doing, I can't never pull it. Yeah, these are great when working on carbs also. When you're pulling your floats off, your needle and seat, most often than not, is 10 millimeter. And I try to tell everybody not to loosen this with a wrench, because these little dogs right here that hold your float on, they're just cast aluminum, and I've seen more than one person break them off by breaking this nut, and then the wrench comes on around and slams into it. I've taken carbs apart and seen them JB welded back together. It is a 10 millimeter, and if you'll just use a 1/4 inch drive, everything's up out of harm's way, and it'll come just right out, and you don't break the little tangs off your floats. Well, I'll tell you also, if you don't plan on buying carb kits, either do these one at a time or keep this as an assembly, because once they've been used and got miles on them, the needle and the seat have become just best buddies, and they wear into each other. So it's best not to take the needle out of carb 2 and put in the seat of carb 1. You need to try to keep these together as a set if you're going to reuse them. Or if you think you're going to save them for a rainy day, the next bike down the road may need them, put you a piece of tape around it to keep them together, because the wear patterns from one to the next is just not going to be the same. And I'm not reusing these ordered carb kits, but actually these don't even have a line formed on them, and I probably could have got away with reusing them, but we'll probably save them for a rainy day. Those are just some tips that I've got for you. You'll also notice, especially on mid-range bog, a lot of these needles all your early models will have grooves for a C-clip to go in. If you'll take that C-clip, if you've done engine mods, and move the clip down one groove, it will raise the needle. Now if you raise the clip, it lowers the needle. But by raising the needle, what you're doing with this taper is you're pulling the taper out of the emulsion tube a little bit sooner, so it's actually not resting in there quite as far as it was. So the further you pull it up, it kind of gets you over that stumbling hump, is where I guess I'm trying to go with this. And your later model carbs will have a fixed needle, and it'll just have a head on it like a pin. But if you have ever saved your old points out of a point driven motorcycle or car, they have tons of little bitty washers, and what you can do is on the fixed needles put your shim under it, and it'll raise that needle up. I'm thinking they started non-shimming them around in the 90s, I think. If you're going to shim them, try to get all the same size shims, because it is important that all your needles be the same height. Really important. For people out there finding these old motorcycles, a lot of times you'll get them in the rack of carbs, they won't even open. I don't care how hard you pull that throttle cable, it's not going to open. It's because the gas has dried up and turned into crystallized, and it's just horrible. This particular set, somebody actually came in there and tried to prise the carburetors open and just destroyed the slide. Now, I was able to find one on eBay, somebody parting out a set of carbs, which is not all that common. Usually they'll want to sell you the rack or nothing. But let's use a little care with these. All this person would have had to have done is spray down in throats with a little carb cleaner, and waited like 24 hours for it to loosen them up. I mean, don't get in too big a hurry. Take your time. Remember that this is cast aluminum. It is not machined aluminum. It cracks easy. When you're putting jets in, any jet, like your pilot jets, if you've got mid-range jets, these are just brass. This is cast aluminum. You just really need to snug these down. You don't need to just torque them. You'll break the ears off these screws right here. You can actually crack the barrels right here. It's a set of carburetors. I mean, don't be scared of them. There's really nothing you can do, as long as you keep your wits about you, that would keep you from cleaning your own carburetors and understanding how they work. But it is a set of carburetors. You're not building a potbelly stove. This isn't cast iron. It's a little bit more complex than an anchor. But take your time. If you're uncomfortable, you can just take one float bowl off at a time and just clean one at a time. So people say, well, I'm just taking one off because I don't get the parts mixed up. Well, that's well and good, But just remember, all your float valves are the same. So if you got 4 of them sitting there, I don't care which one you picked up, as long as you kept it as a set. This one can go here, this one can go there, it doesn't matter. But what I'm trying to say is you're going to have multiples of the same part. I mean, all the floats are the same. All the main jets should be the same size. Your pilot jet should be the same size. So if you go ahead and take them all apart, if it's your first time, you may want to leave one together in case you go, ooh, was that washer on the top or was that washer on the bottom? You do have one to fall back on to take apart and pay a little bit more attention. Take pictures. Do it. Don't spare the carb cleaner. Don't beat on them. And don't use drills on them. Really no reason to be using no drills. I do have a set of jet drills, and I'm drilling my jets simply because it's cheaper. And I'm just going a step bigger on my pilots, and I'm doing a step bigger on my mid-range, and 2 steps bigger on my pilots, and raising my needles one click to compensate for the leanness of no air box and pod air filters. But really, that's about all I got to say. If it's next to the head, in front of the floats, fuel mixture screw. Air box side is an air mixture screw. Synchronization happens at the top. And for goodness sakes, people, that's a drain screw. You got 2. The 2 are going to point that way. Let's see, where's that one? Okay, this one pointing over here. See how that is? That way, from the outside of the bike, you can get to your drain screws. My other one would have a nut or drain bolt facing that way. I get so tired of people putting the outsides on the inside. And then you can all but not get to them, especially when you put this one right next to it. And you're trying to get a screwdriver in here from this side of the carburetor. It just don't work. Just put your float bowls on right. You're driving me crazy. Well, need any help, go ahead and let me have it. If you hate what I just said, go ahead and let me have it. But I just thought I'd let y'all in on that fuel screws are fuel screws, air screws are air screws, and synchronizing screws are synchronizing screws, and where you can find them. Thank y'all for watching. Y'all have a good night.